Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar introducing our new teacher guides to support learners with dyslexia. My name is Kate Hansford and I work as an exam support manager in Cambridge Assessment English. With me today are Jade Blue and Louise Gilbert. Jade is an English language teacher, trainer, artist and illustrator and works closely with the language research team at Cambridge University Press. She has written a wide range of ELT articles, research guides, and Jade is the author of this Teacher's Guide to Supporting Learners with Dyslexia. And Louise, after teaching English in Poland, Finland, and Hungary, Louise started work at Cambridge Assessment English 13 years ago. Now, a senior assessment manager, she coordinates assessment work on special arrangements, including the creation of modified question papers and documentation and support for test centres.
Thank you very much, Kate, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. A very warm welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm in Brighton in the UK at the moment, so it's afternoon for us here and it's a little bit cold outside, but very sunny, which is nice. So I'm going to be introducing you today to the new teacher's guides for supporting learners with dyslexia in preparing for Cambridge English qualifications right through from the pre-A1 starters qualification to the B2 First for Schools. And before I show you the guides, I'd like to just check in with you and learn a little bit about your classrooms. So, how many of you are teaching learners with dyslexia who are in non-exam classes? How many of you are preparing learners with dyslexia for the pre-A1 starters, the A1 movers, or the A2 flyers qualifications? How many of you are preparing learners for the A2 key for schools, the B1 preliminary for schools, or the B2 first for schools? And option D, how many of you are working in other contexts, so teaching other levels or preparing learners for other exams? So use the poll and vote now. And okay, so we've got quite a few people teaching non-exam classes. So hopefully if you're not teaching exam classes, then we can inspire you with some of the content that we're showing you today. We've got quite a few people teaching the pre-A1 starters, A1 movers and A2 flyers, and a few more teaching the A2 key for schools, B1 preliminary for schools and the B2 first for schools. Okay, thank you very much for participating in that. So, the aims for today's webinar. So we're going to show you how the new guides are a resource to support you as teachers, to support your learners with attention to teaching, learning and assessment, as a training resource to help you support learners with dyslexia, and with practical teaching activities for you to try. So without further ado, welcome to the new guides. Now, we've put together two guides for you. The first one is a guide for young learners. So this is preparing learners who are taking the pre-A1 starters, the A1 movers or the A2 flyers qualification. And the second guide is for preparing learners for the A2 key for schools, the B1 preliminary for schools or the B2 first for schools. So I'd like to start off with a question for you before I show you what's in the guide. So, in what ways do learners with dyslexia learn differently to other students? What are your experiences? So type your ideas into the chat box here. In what ways do learners with dyslexia learn differently to other students? What are your experiences? Okay, so someone's written here that learners with dyslexia prefer visuals. That's often the case. Somebody else has written they struggle with reading. They need more time. Processing time, absolutely. Yes, so reading might be slow. This is to do with phonological processing, with understanding the sounds of a language. And remembering information, the chat box is going really quick here. Remembering information is to do with the working memory. Okay, thank you very much. So within the guides, we have included some background information for you. And dyslexia is a type of specific learning difficulty. It's thought to be present at birth, but it can have lifelong effects. Now, learning difficulties aren't related to a person's intelligence, but they are caused by differences in the way that the brain processes information, and they vary greatly from person to person. So within the guide here, you'll see that we give you a definition of some terms related to dyslexia. So phonological processing is something that learners with dyslexia often struggle with. And this is to do with using the sounds of one's language to process spoken and written information. Working memory is about the amount of information that we can hold in the mind at any one time. And processing speed is about the pace at which we take in information and make sense of it. Some of you have mentioned this in the chat box. So the guides give you a background to learners with dyslexia, but we've also included some more detailed information about teaching learners with dyslexia for each of the 4 skills of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So the example here is for writing in English. And these descriptions explain the skills and the strengths that learners with dyslexia demonstrate, as well as the challenges that they face and the implications for teachers. Okay, so who are the new guides for? Well, they're designed for teachers, they're designed for you. And as we've seen, they give you a background to learners with dyslexia. But because the challenges of dyslexia vary from person to person, as we've seen from some of your comments in the chat box, the focus should be on making the learning environment as inclusive and as supportive as possible. So we've included some information here on planning inclusive lessons and developing inclusive learning environments. And the guides also have some top tips for assessment and feedback, and they include some teaching tips and classroom activities. So, why are the new guides such a valuable resource now? Well, with many of us stuck at home, face-to-face professional development isn't an option. And I'm sure, like myself, many of you are missing the face-to-face classroom. But the guides are a valuable teacher development tool, even while you're working from home. So they're designed to be informative, easy to follow and understand, and they're designed to support you to support your learners. So they have lots of practical tips and useful teaching ideas for you to try. Let's have a look at some of the design features in the guides. So, how are the new guides designed? Well, within the guides, we've included navigational tools and hyperlinks. So these will take you where you want to go and back again. So if you have a look here at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that you can navigate the document by using hyperlinks in the text and the buttons on each spread. So you can go to the previous page, to the next page, back to the first page, or to the previous view. So it's easy for you to find your way around. And we've also included hyperlinks within the activities. So these might be links to videos to support you with some of the activities, or to the relevant exam papers. So it takes the pain out of searching for you, takes you directly to the resources that you need, and saves you time. And we've also embedded some key terminology boxes within the guides. So you'll see the orange box here in the top right-hand corner of the slide. And these boxes explain terms that you might have heard of, but you're not really sure what they mean. Now, in the field of English language teaching, there are so many different specialist terms, and sometimes it's hard to find out what these actually mean. So These key terminology boxes are designed to give you a clear and concise explanation of key terms. And these are integrated throughout the guides, so they're there where you need them. This is an example here from the Young Learner's Guide. Let's take a closer look at this. So this example of key terminology is the word mnemonic. And a mnemonic is a short poem, phrase, or word that's used to help a person remember something. You might know some mnemonics yourself. So as well as giving you the definition here, we also have an example to illustrate the meaning. So the example here is for spelling the word because. And because is quite a tricky word for some people to spell. And I always like to remember that big elephants can always understand small elephants. Big elephants can always understand small elephants. So this helps learners to remember the spelling of because. And mnemonics are especially helpful for learners with dyslexia who often find spelling quite challenging. So if you can think of any other mnemonics, please share them in the chat box. Another example that I like is remembering the points on a compass. So mnemonics don't just have to be for spelling, but they can be for other things too. So the points on the compass are north, south, east, west. And I always remember never eat shredded wheat. And shredded wheat is a typical cereal here in the UK. Never eat shredded wheat as an example. And we've got some other examples coming through in the chat box here. Richard of York gave battle in vain. Richard of York gave battle in vain is used for remembering the colours of the rainbow. Okay, thank you very much. So another example here of one of our key terminology boxes in the guides is explaining the meaning of inclusivity. Now, we mentioned that it's important to make the learning environment and lessons as inclusive as possible. But what does this actually mean? Well, inclusion is a sense of belonging, of feeling respected and valued for who you are. It's about feeling a level of supportive energy and commitment from other people so that you can do your best work. So there's just a couple of examples, but you'll find these key terminology boxes throughout the guides in the places where you need them. But what about the pedagogy? What about the teaching? What have we done to help you here? Well, before I show you some activities, let's see if we can help each other, teacher to teacher, because I know that sharing ideas in the teacher's room is something that many of us are missing at the moment. So, what top tips can you share from your experiences about supporting learners with dyslexia? What activities have you tried that you particularly like? And what works well for you in the classroom? Type your ideas into the chat box. Top tips you can share with each other for supporting learners with dyslexia. So somebody's written here, use lots of visuals, absolutely. Giving learners lots of time, using audio and drama, drawing and games, flashcards, speaking activities like pair work and group work. Okay, lots of ideas coming in here. Using visuals, again, games, mind maps, somebody's written here, lovely. Okay, thank you. Now, it's important not to overload learners with too much information. So one way that we can help this is by having L-shaped cards available for learners to frame sections of overcrowded textbook or coursebook pages and help to focus their attention. So you'll see in the photo here that we have two white L-shaped pieces of card, and they're covering the text that we don't need learners to look at and helping them to just focus in on the bit that's important. And we can also encourage learners to use a plain piece of paper to cover reading texts and to reveal one line at a time as they read. And these are useful techniques for all learners when you're teaching reading skills. So this is an example of one of the activities within the guides of how we can help to develop inclusive learning environments. Let's have a look at another example. Now, lots of people mentioned visuals and flashcards and colouring. And absolutely right, when we're planning inclusive lessons, we should try to use multisensory input and practice. Now, with multisensory input and practice, learners are using more than one sense at a time, so the brain is stimulated in a variety of ways. And multisensory activities might involve a combination of reading and listening, viewing, maybe touching an object, moving physically around the space, or using gesture. And these types of activities give learners more than one way to make connections and to learn concepts. So the examples we have here, some of you have mentioned in the chat, flashcards, story videos, using real objects in the classroom. And you'll see that, on the left-hand side of the slide here, it says the speaking activity has a good example of this. So where we've included some of these tips and activities, we're also linking to some other resources within the guides to help you understand those and try different activities. Okay, so what else have we done? Well, we've also included lots of top tips boxes throughout the guides. And this is an example for young learners, for those of you that are teaching the young learners. To support learners with dyslexia when learning the letters of the alphabet, often we put the letters on the wall or on the board in a straight line, but we can actually display the letters in an arc shape instead. And this gives learners an extra point of reference in the center rather than just the first and the last letters. So for those of you that are teaching young learners, can you see yourself using this in your classrooms when you're teaching the alphabet? We've got definitely coming in here. Lovely, absolutely great. Okay, super. Let's have a look at another example. So this is from the guide for older learners, and this is about handouts. Somebody mentioned handouts in the chat earlier on. So we can give handouts to learners on printed pastel coloured paper rather than white paper. And this will help to support them with visual processing difficulties that they might have. And it's important to make sure that handouts are clear and dyslexic friendly. Now, what does that mean, dyslexic friendly handouts? Well, try to make sure that sentences don't run over onto the next line because they can be quite hard to follow. And use larger fonts without serifs. Now, serifs are these little extra lines that you have on some fonts, like Times New Roman has serifs. And an example of a font without serifs is Arial. And this is much easier for learners to read. And we can also put double spacing between lines and add an extra line space between paragraphs to help them process information more easily. Okay, we've also included some top tips for you on assessment and feedback with practical activities for you to try. So for example, you'll see at the bottom of the slide here, adopting different approaches to feedback is particularly helpful for learners with dyslexia. So hearing the teacher's voice can feel more personal and more supportive than receiving written feedback in red pen, for example. So you could make a short video or voice recording with your comments for your learners. And within the lessons themselves, we have the lesson plans. We also give you tips for adaptation activities with different ways of tweaking or adapting tasks to make them more inclusive. And extension activities to encourage your learners to engage in further practice or to explore something more deeply. So these are just some examples of the blue top tips boxes that we've included, and you'll find lots of those in both of the guides. But what about the teaching activities? Let's have a look at some of those. So as well as guidance on developing inclusive learning environments and planning inclusive lessons, each of the guides has comprehensive lesson plans to help you prepare your learners for different parts of the exam. So in the Young Learners Guide, there's a lesson plan for the reading and writing paper another for the listening paper, and another for the speaking paper. And in the guide for older learners, there are 4 plans, 1 for each of the papers. Now, the wonderful thing about these lesson plans is that they're designed for you to use with any of the sample papers for any of the 3 qualifications. So this plan is from the Young Learner's Guide, and it's designed so that you can use it to prepare learners for the pre-A1 starters, the A1 movers, or the A2 flyers qualification with any of our sample papers. So rather than restricting you to a specific paper and a specific exam, these lesson plans are designed to be fully adaptable. So we're going to try one of the lesson plans from the Young Learner's Guide. We're going to have a look at this together and try some of the activities. So you're going to be my young learners for a few minutes. And I'm going to show you a picture. So I've taken this picture from one of the sample reading and writing papers for the pre-A1 starters qualifications. And I'd like you to discuss what you like or dislike about it. So type your ideas into the chat box. What do you like about the picture? What don't you like? So people are saying, I like the colours. They're very bright, aren't they? They catch your eye, very vibrant. Somebody said they like the lizard's eyes. Very colourful, the smiles, the expressions. What don't you like about this picture? Somebody said they don't like the fingers. Don't like the grey background. Okay, so to activate learners' vocabulary for the reading and writing task, you can ask them to call out words connected to the topic of this picture. So it might be describing what they can see directly or what it makes them think of. And you can ask them questions to help with this, such as, what can you see? What colours can you see? How many things are in the picture? And I like this question, how does it make you feel? So looking at this picture of lizards here, how does it make you feel? Type your answers into the chat box. How do these lizards make you feel? Happy, somebody's written. Young, that's nice, very refreshing. Curious, happy and fun, friendly, relaxed, lovely, lots of positive adjectives there. And as learners call out their words, you can write them on the board, eliciting the spelling as you go along. And this might be a good place to use the alphabet arc that we saw earlier to support with spelling. Okay, so next I give every learner a printed copy of the text and a blank sheet of paper. And I explained that learners should cover everything but the first line of the text and demonstrate like this. So the paper covers everything but the first line. And now I read the text aloud to the learners and they listen and follow as I read. And as they read, they should lower their paper, gradually revealing each line. And where there are gaps in the text, I will say gap, but learners don't need to worry about the gaps at this stage. So I'm going to demonstrate this for you. So I'll start reading. Are we ready? Okay. Lots of lizards are very small animals, but some are really big. Many lizards are green, grey, or yellow. Some like eating gap, and some like eating fruit. I'll stop there because you get the idea. So gradually revealing the text in this way will help to focus learners' attention and support learners with dyslexia by reducing the amount of information that they're seeing at any one time. And for some learners, following a text as you read can be quite challenging. So it's important not to rush and to pause to allow learners to catch up and get an overall sense of the meaning. And here's the whole text. So once I've read the whole text in this way, with learners lowering their paper gradually, I would ask learners what the text is about to check their general comprehension and elicit 2 or 3 sentences describing what the text is about. So for this text, learners might say, this is about lizards. It's about what colour lizards are and what they like to eat. It tells us about lizards' bodies, where they live and what they like doing. So these are just some examples of what learners might say with your support. And all of this information comes from what's already there in the text. The gaps don't matter at this stage. So next, I put learners into pairs or small groups of mixed abilities to look at the text together. And I would ask them to underline or highlight all the words in the text that they know, no matter how small, as they read. So often we ask learners to highlight words that they don't know, but this can be quite discouraging and disheartening. But asking learners to highlight the words they do know helps to build their confidence. And then I would give learners pens and paper and ask them to draw a picture of what they've read. So feel free to do this at home yourself if you would like. And there's an example here by a young learner called Erin. So allowing learners to draw what they've understood makes the task more meaningful and inclusive. And by now, learners have a pretty good grasp of what's in the text, and it's quite familiar. So next, I would put learners in pairs or small groups and ask them to look at the first gap together and try to guess what word might go in the gap. Now, for the A1 movers and the A2 flyers, you would probably ask them what sort of word should go in the gap. So for example, is it a noun? Is it an adjective? Is it a verb? Let's try this ourselves. So what word do you think should go into the first gap here? Somebody said vegetables, fruits, insects, spiders, insects, or lots and lots of insects coming through. You know a lot about lizards. Okay, thank you. So let's have a look at our options. So next I show learners the list of possible answers. And with the pre-A1 starters exam, these come with pictures. So I'd give each learner a copy of the list and read each item aloud. And I would use concept checking questions here to make sure that learners understand the meaning of the word. And then I read the text again, line by line, and we try to fill in the first blank together by going through each word to see if it fits. So for example, I might say, many lizards are green, grey, or yellow. Some like eating trees. Does this work? And again, I'd use questioning techniques to help learners develop confidence in selecting the right word. So for example, are we looking for a noun or a verb? Is there a word that definitely doesn't work here? And are there any words before or after the gap that go together with any of the options? So what do you think is the best answer here? A few people have written already, you're way ahead. So we've got spiders, 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 lots of people saying spiders. You're absolutely right. Well done. So the answer is spiders. And when you're happy that all your learners understand which answer is correct, then you can write the answer in a separate space on the board between two lines like this. Now there's a reason for these lines, and that is that the letters that go above the line, so in this word, the letter D, have heads. We say that these letters have heads. And the letters that go below the line have tails. So in this example, the letter P. So this is heads and tails for looking at letter shapes. And persistent difficulty with spelling is a typical feature of learners with dyslexia. And some words can be especially challenging. So this heads and tails activity helps learners to distinguish between the different letter shapes. So then I would give learners lined paper and ask them to practice writing the answer neatly between the lines. And I give them plenty of practice and support with writing the letters, making sure that they don't feel time pressured. So, what other letters have heads and what other letters have tails? So let's start with heads. Which other letters in the alphabet have heads? Type your ideas into the chat box. So letters with heads, we've got B, H, K, lovely. What about tails? Which other letters in the alphabet have tails? Okay, we've got G, J, Q, Y, fantastic. Okay, well done. So in pairs, I would then ask learners to complete the rest of the sentences using the same process by trying each of the words to see if it fits. And I would monitor to support with writing and spelling and see if there are any answers that I might need to correct or explain. And when everyone has completed the task, then we go through the answers together as a whole group, reading the text aloud as learners follow and inviting learners to answer when I come to each of the gaps. And once I'm happy that everyone understands the correct answers and has practiced writing the words, then I would read the whole text aloud again one last time while learners follow and ask them, what have they learned about the topic? What have they learned about lizards? And finally, I would ask learners to look at the pictures that they made in the reading comprehension stage and discuss whether they would like to change anything. They have some more information about the topic now. So I'd give them time to add to their picture, or if they would like to draw a second version. So remember that this lesson plan can be used with any of the reading and writing papers for any of the 3 levels. So this is an example from the guide for younger learners. And now I'm going to show you one of the activities from the guide for older learners. So this is to help prepare learners for the listening paper. And you can use this with any of the sample listening papers for the A2 Key for Schools, the B1 Preliminary for Schools, or the B2 First for Schools qualifications. Now, today, I'm just going to show you one activity from the lesson. So we're going to jump to the listening preparation stage. But before this, learners will have completed a warmer and a task introduction. But let's go to the listening preparation stage of the lesson. So this is an example question from part 4 of the A2 Key for Schools listening paper. And the question is, you will hear a teacher talking to her class. What does the teacher want her class to do? A, work more quickly. B, make less noise. Or C, help each other more. Now, before the learners start listening, we're going to do a preparation activity. And for this activity, they're going to use a framework. And we're going to ask learners to think of synonyms and antonyms connected to each of the phrases in the multiple choice task. So you might want to explain the terms synonym and antonym, or you could use the words similar and different if you prefer. So let's try the activity now. What synonyms or antonyms can you think of connected to the phrase work more quickly? Type your ideas into the chat box. So somebody's written hurry, fast, speed up, faster. And then antonyms, we've got slowly, slow down, take your time. Lovely. Okay, so here are some sample answers, some of those you've picked up on. And as the learners offer examples, you can show them where to write their ideas in the 2 columns inside the first circle. Now, remember that some learners will need support with spelling or writing down what they hear. And some learners may find it challenging to retain information such as task instructions in the working memory. So to check that learners have understood and can remember the task, you can elicit the task steps from the group and write these on the board as you repeat them. And remember to speak slowly and to pause to allow learners time to process and keep up. Now, once you're confident that learners understand the task, you can ask them to work together in pairs to go through the same process with circles B and C. And you might want to pair learners with dyslexia with other learners who can act as their mentor during the task. Now, to make the task more meaningful and more inclusive, you might want to offer learners the choice of writing or drawing pictures of their words. And during the task, we would monitor closely, paying particular attention to learners' spelling and supporting them as necessary. And once pairs have brainstormed their ideas for circles B and C, then you can ask them to walk around and look at their classmates' ideas. And then they can borrow or steal some of these ideas and add to their own diagrams if they like. So allowing learners to move around changes the pace of the lesson and helps to maintain engagement, especially for learners who might be easily distracted. So this is just the listening preparation activity from the lesson plan, just one part of the activity, but the lesson continues with a focus on pronunciation, because of course that's connected to listening and comprehension as well, with the actual listening task, with a post-listening language review, and then with an optional follow-on task. So we've looked at one example for younger learners and one for older learners, but remember that both guides have a comprehensive lesson plan for each of the different papers. Now, as if this wasn't enough, there's more. We have also included in each of the guides a page of extra resources. And this page has links that will take you directly to lesson plans and resources, to blog posts related to dyslexia, specific learning difficulties and inclusivity. And for those of you who want to learn more about research into second language learning, Cambridge University Press have published over 20 free and easy to read research papers. So we've included links here to those that are especially relevant to teaching learners with dyslexia. So now that you've learned a bit about the content of the guides, where can you find them? Well, I'm going to briefly talk you through how to locate your teacher's guides. So these links on this slide will take you directly to the guides, and you'll get a copy of these slides after the webinar. But you can also find the guides through the Cambridge English website by going to our resources for English teachers page, and you'll see the link is at the top of the slide here. And if you scroll down, you can select the relevant qualification from the drop-down menu. For example, you might be teaching B1 preliminary for schools. And you can select the resources from the drop-down menu. So you can see I've selected Teacher Guide here, and then click on the search button and you'll see a link to the relevant guide for supporting learners with dyslexia. Now I'm going to hand you over to Louise, who is our special arrangements coordinator. Over to you, Louise.
Hello, nice to meet you this afternoon. I'm joining you from a different part of the UK to Jade. I'm joining you from Norfolk in the east of England. I'd like to take a little time now to tell you about access arrangements that we have in place for our exams, and also to show you some of our adapted exam materials. So if we move on to the next slide, then that's great, thank you. So first of all, it's important that candidates know that they're able to access test material to demonstrate their, to enable them to demonstrate their skills in our exams. And candidates who need access arrangements can apply for these through their test centre. And if you'd like to find out more for yourselves and to share this information with your learners and their parents, do visit our website. There's a page there which is focused on special arrangements, on special requirements. And there we have information such as guidance notes for teachers. And in those, they cover the 4 skills: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And those give further information on the sorts of modified materials that are available for learners with a wide variety of access arrangements. And they'll give you information about how to apply for administrative arrangements as well. So we're going to look a little bit at these in more detail. So we'll look at admin arrangements and then modified material. So if we move on to look at the administrative arrangements first of all. The main one out of these will be extra time. A lot of students know that they have extra time in their school exams and things like that. That's a very commonly requested arrangement. We usually look at 25% extra time. It can rise to things like 50% extra time if the student has a severe difficulty. We can also arrange supervised breaks. That means literally the candidate has a little break, stops writing their exam, you close the exam paper, you can look away. It helps people, you know, if they have difficulty concentrating for long periods of time. That's available to, you know, to candidates with a wide variety of needs, but it could be useful to your students with dyslexia as well. Students can ask for permission to write their answers using a computer. If they do this, you can't use a spell check or grammar check or any thesaurus function like that. But you could use that, particularly if they find that helpful for their normal work in class. Sometimes candidates still want to write, but maybe their handwriting is rather difficult to read. If that's the case, then they can ask the test centre to copy, to get a transcript made of their work. This means at the end of the exam, they read out their answers to the copier, and that includes all the punctuation and everything, and the copier will write down an exact copy of those answers. And that's the copy that will be submitted for marking. Often in our exams, the candidates have to input answers on a computer marked answer sheet. So if you think it might be difficult for your learners to transfer their answers onto that kind of teleform computer marked sheet, you know, if they might get confused with the numbers or the sequencing when they're transferring their answers, then of course they can ask for help in transferring them over as well. So a copier could do that. Another thing they could consider is if in the classroom they use their own transparent coloured overlay to help them with hard copy materials. So let's say they find it easier to read with a pastel or a pale pink or cream background. Sometimes they have transparent plastic overlays that they can put on top, so that will make you know, printed text a bit more accessible to them. They can of course have permission to bring that into the exam as well. Now, if we move on and look a little bit at our modified material, there's two things that I'd like to talk about here. One type of modified material is designed for a large range of candidates who might need this type of access. And it could be the case that this might help some of your learners with dyslexia. It might not, but it's one option and that's open to them. So I would advise having a look at our website at the sample test materials in modified large print to see if you think this might help them. But it is an option, and it is a standardized layout and font. So we were talking about fonts a little bit earlier, and we mentioned Arial. So this modified large print papers are produced in Arial 18-point bold throughout, and all the text is left aligned ragged right. So this can be found to be helpful for readers who have learning differences and have dyslexia. These papers are made to be suitable for candidates also with visual difficulties. So a lot of the images are removed. And we'll look at these in a moment on the next slide. But another important aspect, of course, is a listening test. And for candidates who need extra time, this is how we give you extra time in the listening test. It's a special version of the test with pauses. So this test version is aimed at anyone who needs extra time, who might find it difficult to listen and read and write at the same time. Because as you'll know in listening tests, when you're a candidate, you're checking forwards and backwards in the paper. You're thinking about the questions, you might be taking notes, you might be answering some of the questions as you go along, and that's quite demanding if you need more time to do that processing. So we have the special arrangements listening tests. The test has pauses in it. As I said, the supervisor controls the audio, and we tell them where they can pause. So the supervisor gets a transcript, they know where they're going to pause. It will give the candidate time, to read or to write their notes or whatever. The length of the pause depends on the needs of the candidate. So they will indicate to the supervisor, when they're ready to move on. So those pauses are in there to help people who need that extra time for processing. Now, I mentioned the modified large print question papers, so we can look at one of them now if we move on to the next slide, and we'll have a little look at a reading paper. Just very quickly, just one small task from that. So as you can see now, that's an example from preliminary reading, and that's an unmodified version. So you can see we have a part 1 question. This is the example from the sample paper with the piece of text and the options A, B, and C. Now on the next slide, we'll look at one which has been modified. The modified version is quite big, so it goes over 2 slides. So if we take a look at the first one, there you can see the part 1 question again. That's the first half of that question. And then on the next slide, we have the example, and you have the notice on the window. What do you notice that's different about this modified version? Can you, if you'd like to type some of your ideas into the chat, that would be great. My computer's on a little bit of a go slow today, so I can see there's a new message, but I can't read the new message. But as you'll notice, there's no picture in this. So the visuals are removed, as I say, to help candidates with visual impairments as well. So in here, you will not notice the pictures so much. And as people said, yeah, it's typed, it's not picture, it's got capital letters, it's more spaced. Thank you for those, yeah. So yeah, it's rendered all in text. The text is bigger than it would normally be, and it's left aligned. And there's a bit more clear white space on the paper. We try to avoid using too much all caps, but it's sometimes used in short sentences, short bits of text like this that we have here. So if you think that this is the kind of material that might be useful for your learners, whether they're learners with dyslexia or with any other access arrangements, then I would advise you to have a look on our website on the special requirements page that we'll link to, and you can check out the sample papers for everything from young learners right up to proficiency, and you can see what they look like there, and talk to your learners about them, see if that's something they would find helpful and they would like to do in the exam. And if I just move on just to finish off here, now we'll just look at how to apply, because we've talked a lot about the special arrangements themselves. The candidates of their parents should contact your local test centre, and you should apply by the closing date of the exam session. So just as everyone else. If there are arrangements that you think your learners need, but they're not listed, you can't find any information about them, then do ask your test centre, because they'll be really experienced in this kind of thing. They've helped a lot of people, and if they don't know the answer, then they'll contact us, and we can discuss things with them. Where a candidate has dyslexia, then we will need appropriate evidence to be sent in with the application, so that we know the arrangements are right for them, and that these are being applied fairly across the board for everyone. So we're looking for a letter or a report that gives an assurance that the evidence of dyslexia was obtained through results of appropriate recognised tests and what those tests were. We do ask our test centres to supply these to us in English, but they can translate the evidence from the parents, from the candidates. They can translate it themselves. So the test centre will be able to look at it, translate it for us, and bullet points and things, so that we know what it's saying. So it will be fine like that. As I say, your test centre is really your first port of call. They can help you with a lot of the questions about your learners. So thanks very much for participating in this. That was excellent. I think we'll move on to our question and answer session now.
Yes, thank you very much, Louise and Jade. We have had quite a few questions coming in that we've tried to answer as we've been going along, but there are still quite a few left. First one, maybe if we take it in turn. So Jade, a lot of people are saying that, it's hard to teach these online, and, maybe people can't move about so much. So can you use these activities online that are in your guide?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you. Teaching, there are some wonderful resources out there for teaching online, and a lot of these activities can be adapted. So, for example, if you're putting learners together into pairs to work on something, particularly if you're asking, if you're pairing up learners with dyslexia with other learners to act as a kind of mentor or support, then of course you can use breakout rooms if you're using something like Zoom, for example. You can also use shared portfolio platforms. So things like Padlet and Bulb are particularly good and have lots of free resources. So learners can share their work with each other and comment on each other's work. And for example, the activity that we looked at in the guide for older learners, where we looked at the frameworks of synonyms and antonyms, you can use different digital tools like mind mapping tools. So an example of this would be something called Miro, which again is free for teachers. And learners can write their answers or write their ideas in this kind of shared mind mapping tool. And you can also use collaborative documents like Google Docs for learners to work on things together.
Okay, thank you. And Louise, somebody has asked if you wouldn't mind repeating what the overlay sheet is for.
Yes, so learners may find it useful to have not a white background that you might get on, printed paper regularly, but as Jade was mentioning as well, to have a coloured background, maybe in pastel or in cream. And if a learner has a transparent overlay, they can lay that on top of any printed material, and that will give them the kind of background colour that they need. Of course, if they're using materials online, then they've got a lot more flexibility themselves to change the background colour.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Jade, do you want to have a look at the Q&A box and see? There's a lot of questions about using the classroom board, a lot of other...
Yeah, there's some lovely questions here. That one there about using the board in the classroom, whether that's in an online classroom or in a face-to-face classroom. I think one of the key things to remember about using the board is organisation. So it's about how you organise your board and making sure that that's consistent, so it's familiar, so that all of your learners know where they can look at to find particular types of information. So that might be the steps for completing a task goes on one side of the board, spelling goes on another side of the board. And also particularly in face-to-face classrooms, when you're looking at new language and new vocabulary, using little drawings and pictures to represent things is really useful, either just by drawing them yourself or cutting things out and sticking things on the board. So again, this is giving learners another route into understanding and to comprehension.
And actually, all those tips are really good for teachers, for all students to have a familiar place on the board and consistency. And that is the key to this, isn't it? Inclusivity.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's including every learner and allowing people to access information in as many different ways as possible, but keeping it organized. So there's a familiarity there. Learners know where to look for things.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Louise, there are lots of questions about different exam levels.
There are, yes. I just found one actually when I was scrolling, which is a good point about marking, and that's something that we haven't covered. So I'll take this one and then scroll through and look for about levels as well. In terms of marking, the exam papers which are submitted are marked in the usual way, because we make access arrangements for candidates such as modified materials or extra time. And aside from that, the candidates have to show attainment across the assessment criteria in the same way as all candidates do, and we can't alter the assessment criteria themselves. So the marking is done on the same basis as all candidates' marking is, which is done, in a fair and equal way. So yeah, that's one aspect to remember. So when people have mentioned things before, such as spelling, if that is part of the criteria for the task for the exam, then the spelling will be marked as well. In terms of different levels, I think I've seen someone asking about Beck and things like that. These access arrangements and modified materials are available across the board. So whether your young learner is taking starters, or you have someone doing Beck higher, then they will be able to get modified large print or the special arrangements listening test. They'll be able to get those materials in any of those exams. So you'll find, as I said on the website, the sample papers, and do contact your test centre. They'll be able to point you in the right direction for making the applications as well.
And that's the same for young learners, older learners, adults?
Absolutely, everyone, right across the board, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jade, other questions about pedagogy and methodology?
Yeah, there's an interesting question here about memory and some of the challenges that learners with dyslexia have with holding things in the working memory. And somebody's asked a question about mnemonics and suggesting that perhaps mnemonics are giving people something extra to remember. So I just want to answer that because that's really interesting, that working memory is an issue for a lot of learners with dyslexia. And what we want is to move information from the working memory to the long-term memory. And the reason that mnemonics are particularly useful for this is because they're unusual, they're different, maybe they're a bit silly or a bit funny. And so they make the content much more meaningful than just a series of meaningless, jumbled up letters. So making mnemonics a bit different, a bit unusual, a bit wacky, sometimes they rhyme, that particularly helps learners to remember things and to move that information from the working memory to the long-term memory.
Okay, thank you. Louise, a question specifically about listening tests. Do the sample tests have pauses in them on the special arrangements page?
Well, yes, it does depend on using maybe the sample material with either a friend, if you're a learner, or maybe with a parent or with a teacher. So you're provided with the question paper and with the transcript and with the audio recording. So the person who's going to be your exam supervisor when you're practicing, they will have the audio, and then they'll need to look at the transcript. And so it will show them where to pause. Then right. They'll press pause, on your computer when you're playing it back. So you will need to, as a learner, if you're using it, you want help from somebody like your friend or someone like that who's practicing with you.
Well, that's useful for teachers in the classroom as well, isn't it? To be able to see the script and suggest when they need to pause the audio recording to help people. Yeah. Okay, well, we are actually over time, so maybe just one more question, Jade.
Yeah, somebody's asked about the reading activity that we talked through in the Young Learners Guide and whether this is appropriate for the whole class. And the answer is yes, it absolutely is. So the thing about these activities is that they're quite varied. They have different tasks that learners that are unusual for learners. So for example, doing lots of drawing of things they've understood. And so this will keep every learner in the class engaged, not just learners with dyslexia. But I think also there's a point to make here about pairing learners up. So pairing learners with dyslexia with other learners to support them also gives a role to those other learners and helps them to feel like they're a part of the group. But absolutely, yes, these lessons are suitable for whole classes, not just for learners with dyslexia.
Yeah, okay. Right, well, as I say, we are over time, so we'll wrap it up today. Lots of interesting questions. Thank you so much for your participation, and thanks once again to Jade, the author of these guides, and to Louise, who is the in-house expert on special arrangements. So thank you, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you in a future webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.